Professionals in clinical research, welcome back to another live webinar. Today we have our special guest today is Dr. Edmundo Tapia. He is a Mexican doctor from Mexico with a specialization in internal medicine with more than 5 years experience in clinical care, epidemiological, those words, studies in clinical research. His professional experience includes medical staff for primary prevention care, particularly in obesity and type 2 diabetes. Some therapeutic areas that are very common nowadays, and I think are growing more and more. I think the statistics were showing that Mexico is heading to be the number one country with diabetes type 2. So it's very important, and obviously you're in the right place for that, right? um, so, Doctor, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and I will let you introduce yourself and your experience, your education, and then we go from there.
Yeah, so thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. And I think you said it pretty correctly. So basically, my background is as an internal medicine doctor, and I have some experience. I spent 4 years doing epidemiological studies and clinical research in the Netherlands, in Europe. And yeah, basically, type 2 diabetes, metabolism, and obesity are my main core and specialties. Yes.
You know what,
Okay.
Dr. Tapia, just really quick, because you mentioned obesity. My PI that I'm working with on getting studies, he's really wants a GLP-2 inhibitor study. I don't know what this is. I don't know what he's talking about. Is this something that's new for research as far as obesity is concerned?
GLP-1 or GLP-2.
GLP-1. Oh, okay, GLP-1 maybe. Yeah, shows you what I know.
Yeah, I think more and more it's becoming a very interesting therapeutic option for obesity, and I'm pretty sure it's already approved as an obesity medication by the FDA and also EMA in Europe. So I understand that now, particularly the United States and Mexico are going to be fields that are going to be interesting for this kind of medication, definitely.
All right, thank you.
So, Doctor, now that you mentioned that you were doing research in Netherlands, can you tell us about it, how it is, how that is different of doing research in Mexico? I know you're transitioning right now, so it will be very interesting to hear your story.
Yeah, I think I did some research in Mexico, of course, not as a PI or something like that, after med school. Yeah, and I think it's like every place. There's some bureaucratic stuff you need to learn the process and to turn around. But in Europe, I think, especially in the Netherlands, which is my experience, the Netherlands universities are very well prepared, and they are very used to collaborate with industry or even with organizations that fund projects. So I think it's a pretty, if you ask me, from my opinion and from my perspective, the Netherlands has become a very key element in doing research in Europe. They're very good at it. They have all the processes completely understood, and they are very good at it. So I think it's very easy. And also something that is very important to mention, perhaps, is that I think the Netherlands is probably probably top 5 countries that they can speak English. And this is very interesting because participants can speak English very well. So even though you are obliged to, do the information brochure and everything in Dutch, people can understand English and they are willing to collaborate with researchers that do not speak Dutch. So I think that makes it a very interesting country to conduct clinical research.
And you're probably the second person that mentioned about the English in research. Like, for example, all the materials and all the the platforms and software are in English, or is in the actual language where it's carried out?
It's in English. it's in English. And of course, you are, again, by law, you need to put, to put the information in Dutch. Of course, when they sign their consent, their informed consent, someone that it's a native speaker must be present in the room. But people speak very good English. So in my case, that I do not speak Dutch very well, I was able to talk to them and communicate and explain some stuff. And then if there was some extra doubt, of course, the native speaker who was always present in the room could explain in their local language. But people are very keen to speak in English, and they are not afraid to participate in something like that, even though the researcher do not speak Dutch. So I think it's a very interesting country to do it.
And how did you ended up in Netherlands?
Yeah, well, I always wanted to do research in Erasmus Medical Center, which I think it's a very nice hospital. And yeah, I did there like a second master's degree, and I was involved in the Erasmus, or I did my thesis in the Erasmus, in the Rotterdam study, which is, I would say, could be compared to the Framingham study. It's a huge data set. And after that, I was kind of hired in another university to conduct a phase 2 clinical trial. Yeah.
Oh, very interesting. And this was for you had a contract for a period, or why did you finally decide to go back to Mexico?
So I that's something interesting. I'm still not sure if I will go back or I will stay here in Mexico. I think one of the reasons is also that it's not that easy to conduct research in Mexico. I think, in my perspective, it's doable, of course, but it's something that I'm still in the process of learning. And yeah, I don't know.
Why is it not so easy? Because Judy was telling us the same thing. She, being in a border town, she was doing studies in Mexicali and having hard time. So why is it, what makes it so difficult to start a site in Mexico, or just even start a study there?
I would like to hear what Judy says first, and then maybe I can pick it up from.
I think it has a lot to what you just mentioned about where you were working at, where the regulations, it seems like they're already set in place. They have a good process. They have a good system. Sites know what they're doing, sponsor CROs. And I want to say Mexico has a lot of work in that end. Like, there's some things in place, but it's not so straightforward, I guess I would say. And depending where you're located in Mexico, the local, agencies you got to work with, it seems it is a lot more work to set it up and implement. So it can be more time consuming for you if you're selected as a site to get started on a study compared to other countries, from my experience.
I think that's also my perspective. I think, of course, industry funded studies are very well processed, or they have all the flow chart of how to do it. But local regulation could be something very different from state to state. And considering that Mexico is a big country, so that is something that plays a role. And the other thing that, from my perspective, again, would be an element to take into consideration is that the system, the healthcare system, is multi-fragmented. You have the private system and the public system, and that also changes things about ethics committees and stuff like that. So that is something to also take into consideration when doing or starting studies or sites in Mexico.
Right, exactly. And like you mentioned, there's a lot of local agreements you also have to put in place with, like, a local hospital, local lab, this and that. And then, I'm not familiar how common that is in other countries. It's not so common. Like the US, we're used to doing a lot of things centralized. In Mexico, it's a lot different. So that's something to also consider. So you also have to have someone that's working for you that knows how to implement these agreements, to follow up, to make sure you can get what you need in place for any new study that you start. And somebody who, pretty much has the time, because it's a lot of time that you're back and forth until you get these things in place.
Definitely. But I think COFEPRIS, which would be the main organization, or the federal organization taking care of it, I think it's kind of evolving, and I think it will be eventually easier to conduct clinical research and start in sites in Mexico.
Yeah, maybe it would be a good idea to find in our network somebody who has a lot of knowledge in the regulatory process in Mexico, or most specifically in Mexico City. That's where you are located, right?
Yeah, I'm in Mexico City. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also, yeah, Mexico has a huge population with so many different characteristics that could be talking about diversity would be very interesting for studies. I don't know what you guys think, but from
Oh,
my
100%. 100%. And then unfortunately, the Hispanic population have the tendency to develop uh, a lot of conditions that no other communities do. I think the communities that get affected more for has more incidents or developing conditions are the Hispanic population as well as the African Americans.
yeah, yeah, sure. So I think that's something very interesting.
Sure. And I have a question, Dr. Tapia. Right now, so since you've been back from the Netherlands, what are you currently doing right now to kind of still, I guess, keep your foot in the door with research, or are you kind of holding off at the moment and still just doing your practice?
So I'm kind of in between stuff. So I'm still having yes, a foot in research in the Netherlands, and here I'm just dealing with private practice and stuff like that. Yeah.
Awesome. And I guess from a PI's perspective, seeing how much easier it was in Netherlands and, the kind of like hurdles that you go through being in Mexico City, um, hearing you say that, you're not 100% sure if you want to stay there just because of that, right? Just the fact that what you're passionate about is difficult just because of processes, right? From a doctor's perspective, how do you feel, that could kind of, who do you feel that could step in to make that process a little bit better? Do you think that that's kind of integrated between the CRO sponsors and maybe even like government or like regulatory facilities? Or, I mean, who do you feel should be, I guess, the entity that comes in and tries to help that? Because clearly there's a lot of lacking on multiple areas, and it seems as if, at least from my viewpoint, that it can't just be the institution, it can't just be the PI. I don't know if it could just be the CRO. It sounds like everybody kind of has to harmoniously work together.
Mhm.
And it's just, I mean, it seems very, especially from all the other interviewees we've interviewed, it seems very, very difficult, right? And so, just from a doctor's perspective, what do you think?
I think indeed everyone plays a role in it, but I think what I mentioned before, coffee prices, I think it's evolving in a positive way. So when they change some regulations, I think industry and other funding opportunities will be more keen to try and walk the process and walk the mile, right? But everyone needs to play a role. And also, I think, I don't know in the United States, but I also think that in Mexico, and that's also something different that I learned in the Netherlands. A lot of people in the Netherlands, from a doctor perspective, they are used to do research and they are used to do clinical work. And here in Mexico, from my own experience, either you choose one path or the other. So
Wow.
it's difficult for people to just stay in between. And I think it's also hard. It's not something that it's easy to combine, right?
Mhm.
So again, everyone plays a role, but I think when coffee breeze evolves, which I think they're doing, that will be something very interesting to look into.
For sure. I actually think we need to find somebody from there so we can interview them, see if we can get some more insight, right? And then possibly see if we can do a dual interview between a CRO, somebody from a CRO or regulatory, and that individual, because I think it's just a communication issue, right? And if we can somehow get people together or get the conversation rolling, you know, small baby steps, but steps nonetheless. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
I think that
Yep.
to further expand on Ashley's question, I mean, who's responsible for it? I think it boils down to the pharmaceutical companies, and if Mexico's a market that they see, and Latin America as a whole. I mean, you guys know the co-founders of LICR. We've been approached for our other businesses by quite a few big pharma that want to tap into Latin America. So that's not just because they think it's a nice thing to do. They see it as a growing market. And not only that, most of these studies are international now. So the data from Latin America definitely can contribute to all the diversity initiatives in the United States for the drugs. I mean, it's still the biggest market here in the United States. So I think, a lot of people look at this thing linearly, and I think we need to look at it holistically because it impacts every country really. Like if we start doing more sites in Latin America, that data is still going to help sell more drugs here in the United States. I think that's what the sponsors are starting to see.
Yeah, definitely. And if I may ask something to you, if you have the data, or I don't, which country has more research in Latin America? Is it Mexico?
I think it's Colombia or Argentina, but this is all anecdotal. I don't actually have data. Is it Colombia? I figure it was one of those two countries.
Yep.
Yeah, Nick. Welcome, Nicole. How's it going?
Hi, sorry about that. Yeah. I'm really excited to be listening in on this. Christine Naro invited me earlier this morning, and I've worked in clinical research for some time. I'm Black, so I don't have any Hispanic or, Latinx background, but I do a lot of research around, disparities in clinical trials. I have a small podcast about it. This like true crime, and I just covered the Puerto Rican clinical trials, the Puerto Rican birth control clinical trials. And I also work for a pharmaceutical company. I work for AbbVie, and I'm heading up a lot of our diversity efforts there. And you're right, there's a big push need, and it should have been happening, a long time ago. I think in academic research, it has been. Pharmaceuticals are trying to catch up now, and everyone's trying to be first, right? So
everyone's trying to be first.
Yeah. I come from academia, so this is my first go at corporate. It's been interesting. So I think there's a real, I hate using the word market, but there's a real opportunity here to include Black and Brown voices and participation in an ethical way if we get ahead of it and push the ethics. And I heard words about, harmonizing and, between CROs and clinics and pharmaceuticals, but really we got to take that harmonization from, international guidelines and start figuring out how we're going to mandate a lot of that ethical conduct. So anyway, love the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
again, Latinos in clinical research, we're open to all ethnicities. So thank you so much for being here and listening in. I'm personally a fan of what you just mentioned for your podcast. So please drop it, in the comment section so that anybody else can get that opportunity to listen in on your podcast.
For sure.
Thank you, Doctor. I've been thinking that if it makes, obviously Mexico is a large country, and you were mentioning that the regulations varies depending on the state, but at the end of the day, are the same bodies regulating all the states? And if this is the case, which bodies are those?
Yeah, I think so. COFEPRIS would be, I think, similar to FDA. And then I think the national health system would be the other main regulator. But for example, what comes to my mind is if you're conducting or screening or including patients or participants in a private hospital, you would need the approval of COFEPRIS, but you would submit, for example, to the ethics committee of the private hospital, right? And that would be very different if you would like to do it in a national or a public institution, from what I know. So these kind of things can change from state to state. And also, I think it will also impact how used they are to having research done in their hospitals. So that's also something interesting to conduct. Yeah.
So it's basically like obviously the hospital have their own SOPs to do this, to carry out the clinical trial. So you have to adhere to those. So for example, if you open your site within a hospital, a private hospital, is that part of the hospital or is that your own business?
Yeah, I think that would be your own business. You would kind of pay perhaps for using some facilities of the hospital, perhaps, but it would be kind of your own business. But again, it depends. There are many, many private hospitals in Mexico. So again, it depends on a
On the
case by
hospital.
case basis. Yeah.
Okay, because I was gonna ask then if it's your own business, then you still have to adhere to their SOPs, or you can have your own SOPs.
I think you would have to adhere to the hospital SOPs, but within your private practice, your private office consultation, you can conduct a protocol. Yeah. Of course, if it doesn't interfere or if it doesn't have a conflict with the hospital SOPs, right?
Very
So
interesting.
it's interesting. So, for example, you could have your private practice in a hospital, in a private hospital, and then you can see your regular patients, so patient care, but you could also see participants. And if you need to, I don't know, if it's a study that involves an IV drug or an investigational product, then you could use perhaps one of the facilities for infusing IV medication, and you would have to pay perhaps the overhead or something, but you don't need to have those facilities. Those facilities are from the hospital, and you can use them, right?
I think that's a great synergy, and that brings makes it easier. For example, in the cases that you have to use different other, I mean, facilities or services, or let's say, for example, if you're doing an IBS study and then you need to do a colonoscopy, then you have it just there, and you don't need it to get it. I mean, you don't have to find another place or send the patient somewhere else because everything is there. So I think that's fascinating, and it's helpful when you are doing research and when you have everything already established. So the part that is difficult is to actually establish the business. And I have a question because, for example, in Colombia, and I think basically everywhere, but I don't know if in Mexico it's the same. When you open a business, like a healthcare business, um, is that treated as a business, and then on top of that, you have all the regulatory bodies for that specific business? I don't know if my question it makes sense. So, for example, you have to get registered the business
Mhm.
as just as a regular business, and then get all the medical regulations, and then on top of that, the research regulations.
Yeah, I think it's like that. You need to get, the to see patients or to see participants, and on top of that, the business regulation, of course.
Yeah, very similar to, I guess, like the US if you set up another business. So, for example, when we had our office, our PI had a inpatient nursing home, and then we set up research in the facility, but it was like its own business. We had to get our own certificates and follow whatever policies, local laws to set that up.
Yeah.
So it was kind of separate, but yet we still had access to some of the patients within his clinic, I guess.
Yeah, sorry, Judy. And this was in Mexicali, or where was it?
Mexicali. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's like that. So it's something like the same, but not the same. It's weird, but
Right. Yeah.
And how, I mean, obviously you're just starting your business in Mexico, but have you heard how open are people in Mexico to participate in clinical trials?
I think that's something that I'm still figuring out. And I would like to hear from you guys from the States. What's the main driver of participants to join a clinical trial? And then I will give you my impression.
Oh, wow. I think it depends on the studies.
It depends on the
For
studies in the
example,
area. But I
yeah.
would say for my community, it's another alternative option. Like they've tried all these medications because we do psych CNS studies. So they've already tried a few depression. They just want something different, maybe see if this will work in a clinical trial. So that's one of the motivators. And being able to come in and be in a study, get seen by a physician, research staff right away, compared to going to a local facility. Sometimes it takes months to get like your first initial appointment, like at the county mental health office. So that's a huge, that's a long wait for someone who has mental health issues.
Yeah,
So
and I think in other cases it's also because, for example, for the Hispanic community, is the Hispanic community have the tendency to truly believe in the doctor. So if the doctor say this is the best or the most appropriate, I mean, I cannot call research treatment, but option for you, then they will have that tendency to follow the doctor's instructions. So
yeah,
I'm thinking probably Mexico is the same case, but not sure about that.
yeah. So I think it's also, it depends on the population and the community. I think where you have all the infrastructure would be the private sector. When it comes to MRIs and PET CT and whatever you can imagine, you have that equipment. But that particular community or the population that have access to that private sector of healthcare, probably when they are looking for alternatives, they have the money, even if it's out of their pocket, to go to the United States, right? So that makes it difficult to keep them here or interested here. And the population that has no financial resources to get an alternative, probably they will look into opportunities in a clinical trial. But the problem is, if they are not like national reference institutions, then maybe the hospital doesn't have the equipment or the human resource to conduct the trial. So that's the problem. So you have different communities and different types of resources. And from what I saw in the Netherlands, is people that are join, it's not because they need the money, or it's not because they are looking for alternatives. It's because they are really and truly interested in research. So what I saw from the participants is that they experienced research for the first time in a clinical trial. They liked it. Of course, they thought it was useful to have like a checkup or the way they see it. But they liked the research, and they enjoyed the experience. So they did it again, and they looked for
Wow.
other studies. So I think that's what I experienced from the Netherlands, and here it's different, I would say.
Wow, that's totally
Yeah.
different.
Yeah,
It's
that's
for
pretty
the
cool.
first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What an educated population.
Yeah, back
I
to
have to admit,
resources and
Yeah.
education and all that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
most
have to
definitely.
admit they are very, very educated population. Yeah.
So that kind of gives into like recruitment. If you have like, a research center in Mexico, is connecting with the right physicians, facilities, hospitals, educating them on research, and maybe establishing some kind of collaboration, because that's how you're going to recruit your participants. But I do know from past studies, even working on US studies, there were some Mexico sites, and honestly some of these Mexico sites are really well established. We're one of the top enrollers in clinical trials that were based, like, I guess mostly in US and a few sites in Mexico. They did better than some of the US sites, and they were able to do things and recruit participants in different ways that sometimes it takes longer for us to do in the US. For example, it was a children adolescent depression study. They were able to get into schools, educate I think teachers and parents about the study, where here in the US you have to go to the board of the board meetings and go through a bunch of hoops, the VP, the principal, and maybe you'll get in, maybe you won't. If
Yeah.
it's private for profit, they're not very interested in allowing you to share your information. But Mexico, they were more open to it, so they were able to recruit a lot of participants for that study.
Yeah, I think that's also something that could be of interest in Mexico, that the regulation perhaps is not that tight. I think eventually it will become like in Europe, that you cannot share many information and stuff like, or approach people. But I think now in Mexico, it's something interesting. And again, I think eventually it will become tighter, the regulation. But I agree with you, Judy. Yeah.
I think all the more reason why these, pharmaceutical companies, like Dan said, and like the CROs and sponsors, they should be making a foothold right now, while, there's not as many barriers, while they can not only get in and, assist, but they could also help formulate a more easier process, right? Be a part of that conversation, as opposed to getting there and having to jump around, right? I I find it, difficult to understand why that's not already happening. But I mean, like Dana mentioned, the separate companies they have been reaching out. So we are seeing, like, I guess, a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, to see that, there's actual movement and interest happening. It's just, hoping that, through these organizations, as well as alternative organizations for different ethnicities as well, are coming together and really trying to push it in front of them and say, hey, like, I mean, it benefits everybody on a whole, whether, like we had said, Nicole Fisher said, so there's a market. I mean, yeah, there's a market, of course, it can benefit the companies, it can benefit the patients. I mean, the fact that, I personally, I have family in Monterrey that has traveled, not just like traveled hours, but, that's money, that's time from work, willing to do that to come over here and just to find any physician. Like, that's how much they're wanting these resources. Like, I don't think, I feel like there's like a miscommunication, understanding how much patients and potential subjects that are in Mexico, how much they need these resources. Um, but, hopefully, with these videos and maybe with some more communication, if any sponsors, CROs are watching, hopefully we can get this conversation going, because clearly there's a massive need.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing the labor shortage just in our economy in general. Healthcare is really no different. Where I am at here in Yuma, Arizona, my doctor can't hire MAs because they don't want to work right now. There's a lot of issues right now as far as labor shortage. And what does that do? That reduces the bandwidth of the physicians. So now what happens? Well, that trickles down to the patient care. Patients used to get seen 20 minutes, 15 minutes maybe by a provider. Now they're lucky to get 5. So when you present research as an alternative to them and say, look, not only will you continue seeing your doctor and get like 5 minutes of FaceTime with him, but did you know that we are also doing this research study here? And while it's not treatment, you will get care. The NP is going to be here. Some of our visits require 6-hour monitoring, continuous monitoring. So to answer the original question, Dr. Tapia, of why do patients do studies here, it varies. The disparities are as great here, if not greater, than they are, or as they are in Mexico, as far as, access to resources. And I think we all have a lot of work to do. And I think at the end of the day, it boils down to economics. These drug companies need more patients because this clinical research at all-time high as far as the number of studies that are out there and the lack of resources. And we just need new PIs and new physicians. So if we can get the physicians from Mexico City, or we can get them from Imperial, California, or Rio Grande, Texas, that's where they're going to go. I think the world is getting flat in that regard. And I think the global market is one market now. And that's the way we see the drug companies looking at this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's also, you mentioned something very important, the time, right? You don't have the time as a physician seeing patients to pitch the idea of a clinical research, of a clinical trial that is running or something. So that's also something very important. And I like your phrase now that it's becoming just one market and it's becoming flat. There's no barriers anymore. And now with I think decentralized studies, that's also something really interesting to look into, that you can reach many communities like that.
Yeah, I mean, the disparities will continue to exist, but hopefully research just gives more options for others. And if not better treatment, at least better medical attention, which is something that clinical research does promise. And from what I've seen, it is able to deliver. Even the most overworked sites, they take care of their patients, as opposed to private practice, where depending on the area, you're lucky to get 5 minutes. Where I'm at, I have private insurance. It's, if I want to see a doctor right now, it's going to take me 2 months. I got to get on a 2-month waiting list to see a doctor. Luckily, I work with doctors, so I could just see them like off the books, but not everybody has that opportunity.
But 2 months on a waiting list for just primary care physician, or for
probably to see me for 5 minutes too and tell me that I'm okay and eat my vegetables.
Yeah,
well, see a therapist
just remember what happened to me. I had kidney stones. I needed that urgent surgery, and I had to wait almost 2 months.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, and say where I'm originally from, for sure specialists, you would wait 3-4 months from a rural area. Luckily, they've been growing, and it was the same thing for research. I mean, people would literally drive 4 hours away to San Antonio just to see a physician, and this would be for something serious with a physician they have no like history with, no trust, established, just because they need to get seen. And that I find also kind of creates, a dynamic or a situation that could actually, like, if they're with the physician, whether it's research or any type of healthcare, that is not how do I say, empathetic to, their background, if they have a language barrier or something like that, just because they're trying to get seen, it can be a bad experience, right? They not get the care that they need or get the attention that they need, ultimately not trusting the healthcare system or not trusting research. There goes one potential subject, one patient, right, that just had a bad experience. And all because the resources within their area that can be easily facilitated if there's communication, resources provided, etc., with the PI or physician that they already have an established trust with, and possibly even, the connection with language, right? And so I really do think that yeah, this is something that is super, super, super important, and hopefully we can make strides on this, whether through LICR or other organizations. But yeah, very important topics.
If I may ask something, does the language plays a role in favor or against in the Latinx community over there?
Well, in my area, yes, for sure. Like my father most definitely. He I get so mad at him because he keeps jumping physicians to the point where like he, even when he goes, he doesn't even pay attention to what they're telling him, because he's just like, oh, the other ones told me that, I didn't trust them, in Spanish, right? I'm telling him, you need to listen, you need to create, like, a relationship, and bad experiences ultimately lead to that kind of a scenario, right? Where he's coming to me for advice and I'm not even a physician, like, what do you think? And so, I will reach out to my friends that are physicians and see if they can speak with him so that he can use me as that to facilitate the relationship trust, that if I trust them, then he can trust them. So, it comes down to how you treat your patients. Do you speak to them? Do you take your time with them? Do you have resources if because some patients, I worked in a rural clinic that was so busy because there was like so many patients and very little physicians. We would see about 100 patients a day. It was so insanely fast. There was a few mid-level providers, but it was just so fast because there wasn't a lot of clinics nearby, and they also did research. They had a section for private and section for the research. And what we did was, if the patient or the subject, didn't feel comfortable, even when you're speaking in Spanish to them, sometimes they feel insecure to ask questions, right? Even if they have them, whether it's English or Spanish. So having the resources available so that they can read it, have some time to feel comfortable to ask the questions, or if their questions aren't answered through the resources. I mean, there's just so many things in between, right? So many gaps. I feel like, it's just not really considered very thoughtfully, whether it's on the CRO sponsor or pharmaceutical side. And I feel that maybe the best thing for them to do is to, go to the route where it's these sites that are actually there, in the thick of it, in these rural communities, right? Because it's very different in the cities. I mean, they have similar issues, but when you have that many patients you're having to deal with, and also trying to maintain research and a general, practice, there's so many ways that things can, fall, right? Or like get in the cracks and stuff. So, but yeah, definitely language is a major issue for sure. Language barrier, excuse me.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yep.
Doctor, now that we're talking about language, how it is referred in Mexico, the clinical trials, is estudios clínicos or how it is called there?
Sí, estudios clínicos aleatorizados.
Oh, okay. I just keep, because, I just wonder what was the name in Latin America. And I had that a question for a while, and I keep always forgetting on asking the PIs in.
Perhaps you're right. Perhaps instead of estudios, ensayos clínicos.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if you search for ensayos clínicos, probably you will find it. Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna make it a mission to look for somebody specialized in regulatory.
I mean,
I will also try to help in that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe a
thank you.
monitor.
Let's do
A
that.
monitor in Mexico would be a good one. I do know someone maybe we can connect with.
Yeah, while we were talking, I was looking on LinkedIn, and I found some, but I'm not sure if they specialize. There is some people that say they are clinical trials specialists, monitors from different large CROs like IQVIA, PRA, which is now Icon, um, in Mexico. So
That's interesting. I think we really definitely do that. We had a PI, we're having a PI series. I think we should have a regulatory series and do it from the different countries, because I mean, somebody's not talking and we need to get people to talk, get this information. And while we're at it, once it's done recording, send it to these pharmaceutical companies that are trying to communicate with us and say, hey, by the way, here you go.
we had it all
You're
ready for
welcome.
you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I think that would be great. Oh my
Sure, that would be great indeed.
gosh.
I had a question. In Mexico, Dr. Tapia, are there drug companies, biotech companies that are started in Mexico and that do studies there?
Like,
Because I know,
I mean,
like in Eastern Europe, when I went recently, and I saw a few sponsors here and there, like biotech companies doing some stuff. I know in Mexico there's a lot of supplement companies and various things like that, but I wasn't too sure if there was biotech or pharma companies. I know like Pfizer, J&J, they all have offices there, and all the CROs do as well. But I'm wondering about the biotech scene. I know there's some CRISPR gene therapy or gene editing folks down there. There's some organizations, but I was just curious about biotech.
I would have to search for it, but I'm not sure. I think they are.
Yeah.
But from the top of my head, I cannot recall a company in biotech that it's doing something here. But I'm pretty sure they are doing something. It's gonna be my homework. I'm gonna have to try to do that.
Mm-hmm. Joe says you need a regulatory manager or specialist, not a regulatory CRA. CROs have those specialists on each country, and sponsors rely on those specialists for those tasks. So
Okay.
thank you,
Ah,
Joe.
thank you.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
helpful.
good
Thank
to
you so
know.
much.
Manager,
All right, Monica, let's do this.
Yeah, I'm doing it. Well, as we speak.
Yeah. Well, does anybody have any questions for Dr. Tapia? I know we've kind of already pretty drilled him on like a very wide range, but if there's anything that you guys might have to ask, feel free.
Sure.
Oh, typing. Oh my gosh. So while we were, oh, sorry, can't be audio right now. Thanks for the meeting. You are very welcome. Thank you for communicating. Dr. Tapia, so if for whatever reason, it doesn't work out in Mexico City, where would you go to go do research?
That's a very difficult. That's a different difficult question. I think I would go back to the Netherlands. It's a lovely country. It's a very nice place to do research, friendly people. So I would go back perhaps.
Well, it's nice to go there, but we hope everything works out in Mexico.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We
There's
do
also a
hope so.
very underrated rock scene in the Netherlands. There's a popular band called Nightwish. They're just getting
Oh
a
my
lot
goodness.
of play. Yeah, Chris knows all about it. So it's not a bad place to be. But Mexico City, we would love if you go, because we're actually getting approached by drug company, like some big ones, saying, hey, do you have contacts? They've never asked us this before, and now they're starting to ask. So I think what I said earlier about it's more of a global market and they need the data, and at the end of the day it just boils down to economics. I think that's not going to change. I think it's just going to increase, and unfortunately I think the bad stuff is also like the disparities and the access to treatment and care, and I think research has a role to play in that.
Yeah, I agree.
And I like to follow that up, Dan, and ask, like, what are you seeing, or what do you think that we should be thinking about, before some of those disparities are made even, larger and more disparate? Because just in what I've been seeing, people reaching out random companies reaching out like, hey, we have this data, that'll help you target diverse markets, you know what I mean, for your research recruitment efforts. And, when I take those calls and I take those meetings and I'm like, all right, this is interesting, but also like kind of terrifying. Where'd you get this? Why are you peddling it? Why are you selling it? What do you plan on using it for? And how because there's no framework yet to really, the FDA has put out a couple of guidances, sure, but there's no real framework yet that explains how we should be going about recruiting diverse patients into clinical trials. And I do worry that it's going to be who's the model. We've seen it in lots of things. Who is the model diversity candidate for this? Who's someone who has all their stuff together, who has childcare, who can take off work, who can, and it has potential to not,
yeah,
I guess, there's a lot of negative implications.
It boils down to financial incentives for the sites. I really believe in private enterprise. I think the sites that are going to succeed are going to be the ones who truly embrace patient centricity. I think, identifying patients, I hate those companies that say that because it's very misleading. We've identified 1 million patients in your area. Well, that's good, but who's going to talk to them? And what if they speak Spanish? And then you got a whole bunch of things that have to go right. As an example, the clinic I'm starting to work with, the PI is my business partner, and so is Chris. But underneath him, 7 other providers work, and it's their patients. So if I have access to the EMR, I could identify patients too all day long. But who's going to go talk to those providers? Who's going to talk to those patients? It's got to be me. It's got to be somebody I train. It's not just going to happen because technology filtered, X number of patients based on my criteria. Like that's just the beginning. The work, there's a lot of work, all the work that goes in after that. So we're a long ways away. I think private enterprise is going to solve a lot of this disparities, but I think what big pharma needs to realize is that they need to invest in more research naive physicians, more research naive clinicians, and give them the tools and show them how they can increase revenue while adding value for their patients, which is something very rare for physicians, because usually if they're going to add something, they have to remove something from somewhere else. Whereas in clinical research, they're complementary and they work better if they're together. So I think we just need more of that. And that's one of the things we're trying to do with LICR. And it's starting to pay off, PI Academy coming out soon. And we've got a few of the big pharma talking to us about, tapping into some of these more underserved areas. So little by it's grassroots. It's not going to be technology. It's going to be low tech, not high tech.
No, it's not. It's
I
not.
know.
And I think sponsors have a lot of resources at their disposal that they can use to educate these communities that have these diverse participants, and they're not using them correctly. Like all these MS medical science liaisons, even the pharma reps, they're already visiting these physicians. Is there something you can do where they can share information about clinical trials? Hey, there's research centers right here next door to you doing this trial, like information like that, but they're not doing it, and they should be doing more of that. And I think that's gonna close that gap.
You know what? Do you know what though? What's interesting to me, and again, I've only been in industry for, I don't know, since February, but what's interesting to me is they are having those conversations, but it's sales. They're having the conversations, but it's not. In my background, I know I'm pharma, but my background is community participatory research. I worked in Detroit, south side of Chicago. Like I'm grassroots, right? So when I come into pharma and I see what you guys are talking about. And if you have someone in Chicago, because I'm still here, I'd love to connect with you guys, offline, because that's exactly what I'm trying to build out. We're going to need to have a presence. Pharma is going to need to have a presence in the community. It is not going to be, sending iPads out there. Like you'd be so surprised at things I've heard. And I'm like, okay, well, that's okay.
We do. We have a clinic, Chris and I, in our consulting company. We have at least one I can think of off the top of my head. They're in Southside Chicago, Eagle Clinical Research. owned by a former CRA that they're doing very well right now. It's another example of like the private incentives, like industry offers these incentives, the smart sites kind of figure out how to capitalize, and in the end, it should benefit the patients in those underserved areas. And it's doing it on a small scale. I think what the industry wants is on a massive scale. And I think they're looking at technology to be the savior. And I don't think technology is going to be.
No.
And I think they want a model that's going to fit all these diverse sites. And no, it's not. Every community, every site is completely different. The way they're set up, who they're connected to, where they're at. So what works into, I don't know, in Texas doesn't work in Paramount. I don't know. It just varies. And I think pharma isn't listening to that necessarily.
Yeah.
Well, they wish decentralized trials can solve everything. If only it could be so simple, And there's almost like an elitist air about it. Like, it's decentralized, and they even use the right words like patient centric. We give the patients the choice. But what are they really doing? I mean, all we've seen is just maybe some AI that could pre-identify patients. But they're not doing the hard stuff of going out and educating them. They're just pre-identifying them. That doesn't mean they're going to join the study.
Exactly.
And we're passing this burden on to the participants. They're having to do more, and they don't want to do that. They don't want to do these, this extra work at home.
Throwing those fancy words around.
Dr. Tapia, I think I found the one. Yes, is a clinical research consultant, and she specializes in regulatory. So I'm going to contact her. And she's freelance, so she doesn't work for anybody.
Oh, that's good.
Good.
And she's where? From Mexico?
Mexico City.
Oh, okay. Very nice. Well, yeah, let's contact her and let's get her on. Maybe for November or December. One of those.
Yeah.
If possible. But awesome, you guys. I guess we're coming to the hour. Thank you so much, Dr. Tapia. We really appreciated this. Lots of good information. Like Raul just said, great meeting. Yes, I agree very much.
Raul,
need to have more of these.
That's right.
Need to have more of these conversations for sure. So thank you so much for providing your insight, your professional insight, and for taking the time to answer all of our questions. Did anybody, Monica, Judy, Dan, Chris, did y'all want to say anything before we wrap it up?
No, just thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank
absolutely.
you.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'm sending you the picture with her name and everything, doctor.
Thank you again for having me over. I had a great time. Thanks.
No, thank you. So we both contact her and see, and see, maybe she answer one of us.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody so much. Latinos in Clinical Research members, we appreciate you coming so far every week. So thank you. We will provide more updates on the next meeting. But for now, everybody have a good night wherever you're from right now, and we will be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.